So I just finished watching the Timberwolves beat the Lakers 97-87. And right before that, I watched the Pacers beat the 76ers. Tyrese Halliburton finally played a good game on the road. And it got me thinking about how the Timberwolves and the Pacers have been two of the more disappointing teams in the NBA so far this season. And the Pacers being a disappointment are a little bit easier to understand, right? Like both of these teams, they're coming off of conference finals appearances, right? Tyrese Halliburton and Anthony Edwards kind of really popped last year, and it's like, are these going to be two of the next big NBA superstars that are from America? And when you think about both teams, I think it kind of makes sense for the regression that we've seen from the Pacers, because let's just be honest here, the reason why they made the Eastern Conference Finals last year was because the Bucks were extremely banged up. The Knicks got hurt throughout their series, and then when they did play against the Celtics, although some of those games were close, they still got swept. And that was really the only healthy team that they played in the entire playoffs. And so it kind of makes sense to see them regress from that Eastern Conference Finals run, or regress probably isn't the right word. It makes sense to see them not meet that expectation again. But the Timberwolves last year, their run was real. They sweep the Phoenix Suns, Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, and then they play the defending, champions, the Denver Nuggets, and they beat them in what was just an incredible series. And then, them and the Mavericks, they go toe-to-toe. The Mavericks end up winning, and then they lose in 5 games to the Boston Celtics. And so I think that people had higher expectations for the Timberwolves this year because their run was a little more real than what the Pacers was last year. And so the offseason, I think everyone's kind of in this mode of like, I can't wait to see what Anthony Edwards and the rest of this Timberwolves team looks like. And then the trade happens. They move Karl Anthony Towns to New York. New York sends back Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo. And I was wondering to myself, why are the Timberwolves only 2 games over 500? Why are they 13-11? Like, what is happening with them? And so the first thing I always go to is like, what is the difference in offensive and defensive rating? And things really aren't that different. Like last year, the Timberwolves were 17th in offensive rating. This year, they're 18th. Last year, they were number 1 in defensive rating. This year, they're 5th. So they're a little worse on both sides of the ball, but the differences really aren't that drastic. So why are they losing games? When you look at net rating says that the Timberwolves are the 10th best team in the NBA, which tells me that they should have the 10th best record, but they don't. They're tied for the 14th best record in the NBA. And look, to be fair, their schedule hasn't been super great. They're in the Western Conference. It's an absolute bloodbath for everybody over there with the exception of the Oklahoma City Thunder. So that's probably part of it. But when you dig into it and when you watch them play, it's very apparent why they aren't winning as many games as they did last year, right? They were the 3 seed in the Western Conference last year. As of today, they're the 8 seed. And the issue is their late game offense. Okay, the Timberwolves, with as many big, long wings as they have and Rudy Gobert, behind the defense to anchor it, they are going to get stops down the stretch. They are too good defensively to not get stops down the stretch. The issue has been the offense. And when you watch them play, you can identify the issue really quickly. It is way too much Anthony Edwards, who's been good this year, right? Averaging like 27 points a night, shooting it better from 3, taking a lot of threes. Do I want to see him get to the rim a little more? Probably, but if he keeps shooting it this well, then I'm not really going to complain about it too much. So the late game offense, it's too much of the Timberwolves giving Anthony Edwards the ball and being like, hey man, go be Superman for the next 3 minutes. And some nights it works, and some nights it doesn't. And most of the nights it doesn't work because there's not enough spacing around Anthony Edwards. Okay, where they really miss Karl Anthony Towns isn't in the first 45 minutes of the game. It's late when they want Anthony Edwards to go be the guy. Julius Randle doesn't supply the spacing that he needs, that Anthony Edwards needs, to get to the rim. Things are just a million times harder on him. And Julius Randle, who's a good player, right, been 3rd team All-NBA before, he's just not a good enough offensive player to allow him to be Superman from time to time. And when you look at the Timberwolves offense in clutch time last year compared to this year, they were so much better last year. Last year, the Timberwolves were 15th in points average during clutch time, which is, for those who don't know, that is the final 5 minutes of a game where the score is 5 points or less, okay? Or the difference in score is 5 points or less. In those games last year, the Timberwolves were 15th in points scored in those final 5 minutes. This year, they're 26th. Last year, the Timberwolves were 21-15 in clutch games. This year, they're 6-8. The issue is the offense. Last year, Anthony Edwards was 25th in the NBA in points scored on average during those final 5 minutes of clutch games. Okay? This year, he's 39th. Last year, Karl Anthony Towns, the second best offensive player on the Timberwolves, was 62nd in points average during clutch time. This year, Julius Randle, the number 2 guy, the guy who's supposed to be the Robin to Anthony Edwards' Batman, Julius Randle is 108th in average points scored during clutch time. That isn't good enough. And I think a large part of it is the lack of spacing. Like when you watch the NBA today, it is all about space and pace. We want to play fast. We want guys running to the wings and to the corners to really space out the floor to make it easier for drivers. And if you help, we're going to kick it out and find someone open for 3. And late in games, Timberwolves, they just don't have the shooting for it. So the trade deadline, it is going to be here sooner than we know. But I fully expect to see the Timberwolves make some sort of move to add shooting that can close the game. Like, they're going to look to add a shooter that can help them close games because they desperately need it. If they can just figure out these clutch games offensively, then they're going to be really good again. But until that happens, they're going to continue to be an average NBA team because that's what they've been so far this season.